This is the Local Real Estate Developer Podcast, where we share the stories of locals across the country who took that empty lot or that old building and turned it into something awesome that their community needs. I'm Kristi Kandel, and I've been a real estate developer my entire career. My co-host Raphael is a commercial broker, and together we're sharing the stories of locals making a huge impact on their communities. And what we've learned is you don't need millions in the bank or decades of experience to get started. You just need the confidence, tools, and the right people around you. This podcast is your chance to gain the confidence to get in the game, because real estate development isn't just for the insiders anymore. It's for people like you too.
Welcome to the Local Real Estate Developer Podcast. I'm your co-host, Raphael. I am a commercial broker, investor, and developer located here in Louisville, Kentucky, and I'm here with my co-host, Kristi Kandel, developer extraordinaire, and I think you're still in Florida, but you may be coming up north in a few weeks to maybe we'll connect in person for the first time, which would be great.
Yeah, that's right. I am in Florida, and like you said, developer, investor, and I teach locals how to become developers in their community. And yes, I will be road tripping up to Ohio and a couple other states and stopping by to see you. So I'm very excited about that. And so today, something else I'm super excited about. I found Brett on Instagram and just started watching what they were doing. I was like, whoa, this is so cool. It's a story that we need to share with our local developer audience. So Brett McManus, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you both. Excited to be here and get into it.
Right
Absolutely.
on. So
Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. I was just going to say, so what we like to do with our guests is just kind of give a quick background on who you are, where you're at in the world, and then we'll kind of dive into how you got into real estate and now what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, my name is Brett McManus. A lot of people know us from our Instagram page, Investors, where we kind of document our journey. We're really in that boutique hotel in space here in central Vermont. So whenever I say we, it's me and my wife, Casey. We really work like 50-50 in a lot of this, but my end of it's much more finding the money, finding the property, getting everything turned around and operating it. And she's kind of our guest-facing hospitality side of things. So yeah, based out of central Vermont here and in that hotel space, but kind of have a background in house hacking and kind of very humble beginnings, I guess we'll say that. Happy to get into.
That's exciting. Yeah, the house hacking, which I know we'll probably dive into, that's how I got started in real estate, is just buying a fourplex and living in it for a while. And then as I was transitioning into full-time commercial brokerage. So it's a pretty powerful strategy. Maybe go back to the beginning when you first got into real estate. First off, what was the inspiration to do that? And then what was kind of your first foray into that new endeavor?
So for me, it really starts kind of in my early 20s. You know, my then girlfriend at the time, Casey, and I, we were out of school, we were getting jobs. And, after working for a little while and paying rent, we weren't super stoked about that. We had moved from like a very small rural areas into a bigger city where you're actually paying like what is now real rent at the time. It's like, man, this is a lot of money coming in and out every month. I was just Googling and researching around. And one of my coworkers at the time had told me, like, have you ever considered house hacking? And she was the one that kind of introduced me, again, what would have been like 2019, 2020, right before COVID, to the bigger pockets world and everything like that. And I just fell in love. I had grown up never in real estate, but always kind of very hands-on. I grew up in a family of mechanical engineers, and we were always working on cars and snowmobiles and things like that, and just very hands-on. It's like, well, hey, if I can do all this, we could probably figure out how to fix up a house too. For us, that first foray, it was really just buying a duplex when a lot of our friends were buying single family homes, and we lived in one half and rented the other half, and then spent what then became the COVID lockdown learning how to renovate a lot of these properties. So that was really where I fell in love with the world of real estate. From there, it was, I always had a job. I was always, doing it on the side, but every year we would start just kind of jumping into the next house hack. We'd save up a little money, put that as a down payment, fix it up. Slowly over time, you learn about hard money and you learn about things like that. We started kind of tiptoeing in the world that was short-term rentals. So, that's really when Casey became a lot more interested in what we were doing. And it was really kind of that realization, we had been getting into real estate for a little while through these house hacks, learning about the ideas of raising money and refinancing and elements like that. Then we started getting into short-term rentals a little bit as well, making some money, having some success there. But what really was the kicker for us is I started learning about the world of commercial real estate and how commercial real estate is found and underwritten, and the way that you can really force appreciation through the income that you produce, not just what the neighboring house sells for. And it was kind of this culmination that happened to us of, just everything we had learned. Now this like discontent with our short-term rental business because we were doing all this work to grow a business and run it and not really have much more to show for it outside of the cash flow. And you can kind of see where the inklings for this boutique hotel motel idea came to be.
That's awesome. So regarding that, kind of unpacking that a little bit. So you first started in the house hacking space. You bought a duplex, fixed it up, rented it out, and slowly but surely you started adding different house hack opportunities to your portfolio, started dabbling in other investing on the residential side. And then once you started kind of figuring out that the commercial real estate world was a little bit different in the way that you could potentially add value to these properties, that you decided to, jump into that space. What was the first project you guys decided to take on? Was it this particular hotel or was it something else?
Yeah, so we'll say this hotel was the first one we closed on. I think for a lot of people, when they get into commercial real estate for the first time, there's a graveyard of deals that gets left behind. So we had a few of them that we went through, and in the we won't get into all of the deals, but it certainly carries over this hotel project. The theme for us this entire time is being grossly early and grossly underprepared for every project that we've gotten into. And these hotels were certainly an example of that. So for us, like, we were always kind of over our ski tips a little bit on every deal we did. We were in our early 20s. We didn't have a lot of money. We didn't have a lot of resource or backing. And so that made it very difficult with banks and brokers and things like that to get the time of day. So with that, we had to get scrappy. Where there were some deals that we got into. A lot of it was off market. A lot of it was word of mouth. A lot of it was cold calling. And naturally through that endeavor, you find a lot of projects that don't pan out. It's kind of the school of hard knocks a little bit, figuring it out, but it was the way that we got into it. And we do one deal and figure out, hey, there's something really wrong with this property. And it's actually not going to pencil out by the time we fix all the mold and, dilapidated ceilings and things like that. Then you find the next property. It was like, hey, this property's good, but the owner wasn't so honest on their P&L. And you start learning how to compare those with the tax returns. But the project that I'm at right now, it's our 17 unit that we found in the ski town of Killington, Vermont. It was kind of the third time's the charm for us, where everything comes together. We had learned everything about how to raise the money and how to find the bank loans, and really all the ways that two kids in their 20s can figure out how to pull a multi-million-dollar project like this together. It all came together in this deal.
So I have a question, because what I think is good is if we share with people that the development projects, they start well in advance of ever breaking ground, of ever starting the rehab, and you do go through that graveyard of deals and you're vetting them and going. Can you maybe actually back up and talk a little bit about, because it sounded like you got some help and had some different education. What resources did you use to help you feel comfortable doing that? And then also, how did you figure out your market and then start to put in offers and LOIs and get into due diligence?
Yeah, for sure. So, still today, and especially at the time, 2 or 3 years ago, there weren't a lot of people doing this boutique hotel thing. It was definitely kind of the new asset class in the block in terms of the books, the YouTube videos, the courses, things like that. And truthfully, there wasn't much. I think there was like one really course on how to do it, and it was well above like what we could afford to pay at the time. So we just kind of had to figure it out. So when it came to commercial underwriting, we ended up having to basically look at a lot of multifamily resource. So what we've now kind of learned in hindsight is outside of the income portion of this, like when we're actually vetting one of these deals and figuring out if it'll appraise and cash flow, a lot of commercial real estate's the same. It's income, less expenses, and a lot of these expenses aren't too different in multifamily. Of course, we could just talk to some hotel owners to figure out like, hey, you need to budget for cleaning and linens and like a few supplies, but essentially the underwriting is very similar to multifamily. But with some now there is a little bit more research is out there. There's people on YouTube. There's some coaching programs that aren't horribly expensive. But for us, it was really just finding what was working for others in other hospitality asset classes, and then putting it together what we knew from our time operating short-term rentals. So it's one of the things, like a lot of people, especially with the presence that we've made for ourselves on social media, we get a lot of other young couples that come to us and they say, hey, we want to jump in and we want to do a hotel or an inn, exactly what you're doing. And it's like, well, it's great. It's awesome. But it's really good to go work for somebody else, or to go ideally spend some time in short-term rentals as well first, because there is some art that really happens in hospitality, particularly on the income, the way it's calculated between your average nightly rate and occupancy, that even in the world of commercial real estate isn't as scientific as it can be with some other asset classes. There's a little bit of an art, especially early on. So a little bit long-winded there in like the education, the on-paper stuff. But then for us, we really learned that it's really difficult to put hospitality to a science sometimes. So for us, we really wanted to kind of, I guess, get a little bit of a tailwind, which is one of the reasons that we decided to pick these ski towns to get into originally. We were skiers, we were mountain bikers. I never had lived in Vermont, but had always lived in the Northeast and spent a lot of time there. So there's a few things that we did for ourselves there of really picking a few key markets that we at least knew a little bit. We knew that there was demand there. We knew that it was an audience very similar to ourselves, even as it kind of later in the conversation as it comes into renovation and where we focus dollars on, just having that understanding of who the user was. So taking that kind of what we were organically knew a little bit about these markets and then combining it with what we were able to learn about some of the more technical bits. Again, what the bank is going to be looking for, what the appraiser is going to look for, how much some of this costs. And we just kind of put that together and truthfully just stumbled into it ourselves. And it took a couple of years at the time to figure all this out, from kind of idea to actually closing on this first property. But we were able to do it without, dad bestowing all of his wisdom down to us, or a $50,000 coaching program that most people can't afford. It takes some time and a little bit of trial and error.
No, for sure. And regarding some of the deal points, I'm assuming, were you able to get the property at a basis that was pretty achievable? So if something were to happen during the construction, that you have a little bit of grace, I should say?
Yeah, it's more so making sure so that when something did go wrong in construction, as it did for us, and I think it does for a lot of people on their first deal, so that's where we were lucky. So when we got into it, again, we did not have a lot of connections in the space. So we started talking to some banks, we started talking to some brokers, and it was very clear that nothing was going to come to us on a silver platter. And why should it? It's like there was nothing on paper that ever said that we'd be able to get one of these closed. So we ultimately had to turn off market. And what that ended up looking like for us is it was pretty simple. It was, we identified a handful of markets that we thought were good, that had 3-season demand. That's another thing in hospitality that I really caution to people getting into it is, you really don't want to be in a scenario where your first property is going to have to be closed for 6, 7, 8 months out of the year because, there's no winter demand there. And it was one of the things that we liked about Killington and a few other markets in the Northeast is you have golf and biking and hiking in the summer, you have skiing in the winter, and it just takes a little bit of that risk away. But ultimately what that looked like for us is we would just go to these towns on Google Maps and we would see, hey, in a sea of 4.8, 4.9, 5-star reviews, what were the 3 to 3.5 star properties on Google, and we'd read through those reviews. And what we kind of the learning curve for us in the beginning was some of those, it was like, hey, the heat doesn't work and it's moldy and it smells like must and the breakers kept tripping. And we kind of learned on some of those early deals we underwrote, those are very expensive things to try and fix. But then what we ultimately found in the property that we went forward with are some of the examples where it's like the owner's a jerk, the room was dirty, and the booking process wasn't easy. It's like, we can fix all of that. That's a lot cheaper to fix. And come to find out, there's plenty of other, renovation related items that gave us a run for our money. But that was kind of what that process looked like ultimately for us going off market, which ultimately gave us the ability in this kind of rapid, phase that we were in 2022, when a lot of people are getting into this, ultimately being able to find a deal that would, and happy to get into it as well if it's of interest. But a key part for us is the SBA, the Small Business Administration, were the only people on the face of this earth that would even take a look at us. And what that really involved for us is I didn't have $1 million net worth, or we didn't have a key principal or somebody of that figure who's going to back the debt for us. So we really had to find a property that was kind of a unicorn a little bit, where it had good historic income that would allow it to qualify on its own for the financing, but still had enough upside that we could come and fix it up and squeeze some life out of it. So it took a little while, but kind of through that strategy I laid out, we were able to find the right fit to get it done.
Yeah, I like the approach you took with looking at the reviews and kind of seeing what are things that we can do from a hospitality mindset that we can fix that are just a matter of, maybe it's just bad operations, or maybe the owner's already done their cycle and they're kind of phasing out and you're like, I can fix that. So that part is really cool. Definitely let's talk to the financing side of it and how you went about it, because that is something that a lot of people struggle with. And they're like, who would believe I can do it? And how do I even get this funded? And how does that, like the debt versus the equity, how does that all look? So yeah.
Yeah, and especially 21 and 22, where hospitality had taken a hit during COVID. So there was a lot of banks that were just didn't want to touch it. Even today, some banks are very hesitant about doing ground up construction for hospitality.
Yeah, and that was one of the big issues. We actually faced it. It was incredibly difficult where we're at. So Vermont is a wonderful state. It's a great place to be, but it's not exactly the most populated area. And with that, you don't have as many banks and people to choose from. A lot of investors get nervous about parking dollars there. And especially actually post-COVID, when people started traveling, there was actually a huge boom in hospitality in those early years, because everybody who, was a high income earner that retired early from their tech job in Boston, they all wanted to come up to Vermont and retire and buy these little inns. So actually a lot of banks had just given out debt on a lot of these hospitality projects. And they're like, we don't want to take any more of these on our books. They didn't want any more hospitality, because it's a risky asset class. So we had a really hard time. So for us, what it looked like, again, there wasn't a lot of education, there wasn't a lot of resource, but the good news is I think for us, even being young kids and excited, a lot of people were at least, people in the banks, brokers, they were willing to give us a little bit of education. We realized early on it was going to be very difficult. I had mentioned one of the things that a lot of these banks look for is they want some backing. They want some net worth. And while we had done other real estate projects, I didn't have substantial collateral. Everything was still leveraged fairly high as we had refinanced it and kind of burned out. We just didn't have a lot of that resource. So we were introduced to this product called the SBA 504 loan. There's a few different SBA loans. So the SBA is a Small Business Administration, and they do loans kind of like the FHA, where it's like the bank is still issuing it, but it's government backed, as long as it's for a business. So one of the key things is a lot of times for like multifamily and even certain office and industrial real estate, depending on, or retail, depending on how much of it you're occupying, it won't qualify. But in our case, we're buying a piece of real estate that is an operating business, similar to self-storage, similar to a car wash, similar to a laundromat of that such. So you can get an SBA loan. And the cool thing about those is, again, one of the challenges we knew early on is like, where were we going to get the money from for the down payment? And a lot of these syndication models, you got to raise all the down payment on the purchase plus all the renovation. And what we saw is a lot of these scenarios where you have operators that end up having to give most of the equity away and still having a very difficult time to raise all this money to get all the cash that they need. The cool thing about the SBA loan is what they'll do is they'll take all of your purchase price, they'll take all of your renovation funds, and for our case, even like the FF&E, like the furnitures, the lamps, the sheets, stuff like that, they'll roll it all into one loan that's fixed for 25 years. And you just put 20% down on that total amount. So we knew that was going to be the ticket for us, because what that was going to do is basically going to let us get a lot of the proceeds that we need so that we could keep most of the ownership. It limited the amount of money that we had to raise from outside investors, and it required nobody besides us to have to put a personal guarantee on the debt, which then gave us the ability to find investors a little bit more easier. So as we were going through this process, we're attending our local RIA meetings, coffee clubs, things like that, just telling people about what we were doing. And naturally, we were able to just find a couple of individuals that each kicked in $200,000 each. That was our down payment. That was our kind of our reserve and some of our operating funds as we were going through renovation. And then the other funds all came from the SBA. So our total purchase price was $1.4 million. And then there was 300,000, ended up being about 400,000 all said and done that we put into the renovation. So that was kind of how our debt and equity was split. We had a 400,000 that covered our 20% down payment, our closing costs, and some of the operating funds, the rest of it coming from that fixed rate debt from the SBA and the bank that ultimately collaborated together.
That makes sense. So with that, with the equity that you raised from prospective investors, how did you structure that payback? Is it very much a JV, or did you do the actual, LP type of arrangement that requires you to go through the whole rigmarole with the securities attorneys and everything, or did you just try to keep it somewhat simple?
Yeah. So in this case, again, always consult your attorney, always consult your CPA. But for us, the accredited investors that we are working with and the role that they were going to play in the business, just from a mentorship standpoint, especially on the renovation and some of the key pieces, we were just able to JV on this. So we kept it super, super simple, especially for us. And I think it's one of the lessons where if you're new or you're young or you're in your 20s, I think a lot of people are quick to go out and learn about all these waterfall structures and things like that and preferred returns that you got to know a little bit of. Certain investors want to look for this, but for us, we found it incredibly beneficial to just go out and find, especially the fact that we only had to find a couple of investors. We didn't have to go find 20 or 30 individuals to kick in on this. We were able to find just a couple of individuals that had a higher level of sophistication and knew what they were getting into, and then keep a very, very simple process where it's like, hey, you're going to put your money in, you're going to have X amount of ownership into this property. Every single quarter, we'll look at whatever, nobody's getting a distribution for the first year because we got to spin this thing around. And then every quarter, we got to keep a certain amount of reserves in the tank for the rainy days that do happen in hospitality. And then we just get a distribution based on your ownership percentage. And ultimately, the way that we'll do it is we actually were able to structure a fixed buyout. They knew very early on that they didn't want to be in this forever. So in our operating agreement, we could have a very clear buyout plan as well, where when we refinance the property, we'll be able to buy them out of their equity. And then just my wife, Casey, and I will own this property outright. Well, plus the debt.
And when you buy them out, do you just know the numbers are so good and you know where the rehab is that you can get the full money back from the refi?
Exactly. And that kind of brings it back to your earlier question, Kristi, about kind of knowing that plan before you get into it. It was a lot of comping and a lot of math of knowing, hey, we know right now, the dollar per night is around $200 a night on average at this occupancy. And we believe by fixing it up and turning it in a nicer place that we're going to be able to bring it up to X amount at a 10, 11 cap, what hospitality trades at in Vermont. We know roughly what that appraisal is going to be, and then use a similar loan structure. So when we were talking to a lot of our bankers, yes, we had to use the SBA. And yes, we had to use that program, but that was one of the things that we were really kind of adamant about it when we were finding a bank to work with, is somebody that understood our plan and also knowing what those terms would likely look at with some buffer that we've learned to bake in today's day and age as things can swing, that we would be able to refinance with some cushion and pull that money out before we even closed on the purchase up front. So to get back to your point earlier, that was crucial.
Hey, can we chat for a second? Since you're listening to this podcast, you're already thinking like a developer. You see the potential in your community, and you're ready to do more than just watch from the sidelines. That's exactly why we created the Local Developer Vault. It's a free resource full of tools, templates, and trainings to help you take action. And here's the best part. When you sign up, you'll also get access to our local real estate developer community. It's full of people just like you who are making real things happen in their neighborhoods. So don't just listen to the stories. Become the next one that we spotlight on our show. The link in the show notes to unlock the vault and join our movement.
That's awesome. No, I appreciate your thought regarding the simplicity of investing, especially for the first go around. You know, all the projects I'm involved in right now are also JVs for that exact reason. Going through the whole rigmarole of dealing with securities attorneys and having to register with the SEC, and from a compliance standpoint, it's very rigid. Obviously, that's probably worthwhile if you're dealing with people you don't know, all the people who are advertising to a broad base of people and taking money from the general populace. I mean, that's going to be required, but I don't know. I think that don't make it harder than it needs to be, especially early on. Just take on projects that you think you can team up with a few people and take them down, because it's probably going to save you a lot of headache and maybe avoid some gray hairs early on in your development career.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of the benefits, just to bring it full circle. It always sounds like these beautiful stories in the podcast, but it's really the importance of some of those early deals. Again, the investors that we work with were colleagues of people that we had took hard money loans from, and that we had gotten to know them from years going to these coffee meetups, and they followed us on social media and they saw what we're doing. So it 100% spot on of what you said, Raphael, but it's really, for anybody listening, one of the important things. You just got to get out there and you got to talk to people, tell them about what you're doing, do some early hit deals. And then these bigger ones, that they won't seem like puzzle pieces in the moment, but you just never know where these relationships will blossom. And that's very much been the story of what's worked in our favor.
That's awesome. No, so regarding that, so you identified this opportunity, you engaged with prospective investors, raised the equity, communicated with the bank, provided your proposal, and finally were able to secure a loan plus whatever additional funds to be able to handle the renovations. Talk to me a little bit about that second phase, which is the actual construction, because everything looks great on paper, but then when you actually get into it, you start, breaking up, and I don't know the scope of work you guys had to deal with, but you start opening walls, you start doing things, and you're like, oh man, like we're getting into stuff that maybe we didn't necessarily anticipate, and you have to pivot throughout that process. So if you could share a little bit about that, the construction process, and maybe talk a little bit about some of the partnerships you had to leverage to be able to do that, given the fact that you guys aren't from the local area.
Yeah. So a little bit of the key context you got to understand is about picking the right property and the property that you choose. So that when we went through that whole first phase, we now rewarded ourselves with holding the keys to the Happy Bear Motel, which was really the gem of Killington. And so one of the things that had happened in Vermont is during COVID, again, Vermont is not a super highly populated state. There's only so much infrastructure here. And when COVID hit, a lot of the homeless shelters all got dispersed. And so what the state did is they went back to a lot of motels and they said, hey, you have two options. You can either shut down completely for what ended up being one of the longest state mandated business shutdowns, or we will give you between $2,000 and $3,000 per month to house somebody that's been displaced. So a lot of motels, they took the cash. I mean, the owner here, it was either shut down or take like $35,000, $36,000 a month without having to do anything. But unfortunately, a lot of these properties got left in really heavy disrepair. So here locally, we were left with a property that, physically was still in good shape. The nice part about a lot of these like 50s, 60s, 70s built, like I know Florida, Kristi, a lot of these are down there, is like cosmetically they can be nightmares, but they're built really as structures. They built a lot of these out of concrete block. Again, the paint, the carpet, everything inside is a nightmare, but they're really solid buildings that you can find at that age when a lot of these roadside motels were getting built. But again, cosmetically, reputation-wise, the place was in horrible disrepair. Locally, people hated it because, one of the tough things about being in a ski town, there's always a need for this kind of housing, but one of the the big issues that happen here in Killington is it's very easy to steal skis. It's very easy to dine and dash a lot in restaurants. So a lot of car break-ins, things like that, that a lot of people were really, really frustrated locally at this property. And while we knew about everything that was going on before we got into it, what we underestimated were the benefits that would come from really having a community rally behind what you're doing. So when you can find one of these assets that's really kind of become the eyesore of the community and it's really bothersome to the restaurants and everybody nearby, we found in our experience, especially in some of these smaller rural towns, that things can start moving a little bit quicker in your favor. So Vermont is one of these states that, can be a nightmare to find contractors and any type of laborers, just like anywhere else. But that was one of the big tailwinds that we had. So to get back to your original question, what the scope looked like for us, it was really a full cosmetic renovation of the property. It was ripping everything out, all the beds, everything like that all had to get replaced. But then what really became an issue for us, and one of the words of caution that I will always layer into our social media videos from time to time and pass to somebody else, is learning the difference of commercial code versus residential code. And it was something that we did not spend enough time researching. And it really kind of ended up being one of the things that bit us early on. So the example of that, like, we came in and we did our renovation, and I'm used to renovating all these old 1905 houses in Western New York that, as long as you don't have knob and tube, mold, and asbestos, you're golden, you're good to go. So we're going through and I'm seeing Romex and I'm seeing good signs like, this is going to be a breeze. We're going to do some paint on this thing, do the vinyl plank flooring, and we're going to be good to go. And then it was the first time that the fire marshal came through and we started opening walls up, and he saw some of the older Romex and he's like, oh, no, you got to rewire this entire building. So it's one of the things that really came to bite us. Luckily, I had mentioned when we were raising money from investors, we had raised a little bit of extra cash to be some of that operating capital. The other tailwind that we had is we had closed at the right time. So we were very lucky when we closed in February. And even though the property was in very disrepair, very much so in a state of disrepair, we were able to operate it as is for the rest of our ski season, which is our busy time here. So if you're looking to get into a hospitality project like this, that's another tailwind that you can do, where if you can kind of close in the middle of busy season, your life will be horrible figuring out how to run this property in the middle of busy season. But we were able to make some cash out of the gate, which ended up really saving us with some of the renovation overage we had. But that's really where things kind of started to take shape for us. Is it was a cosmetic renovation that turned into a slightly more than cosmetic renovation, having to do some of this utility work. But we were very lucky that, in the sense of that, we were really taking on a project that locally had been such a pain point. We found it a lot easier to get a lot of some of the contractors, the electricians, the plumbers, people that usually were booked out for 2, 3, 4 months. All of a sudden, we found a way for us to be their kind of side job when they had a day or when it's raining and they needed somewhere to go. So there were a few things from the project itself that really ended up working in our favor.
That's great. No, it's awesome. Go ahead, Kristi.
I was going to say, so when you ran into some of that stuff in the commercial permitting and code, how did you guys go about finding, well, it sounds like you also pulled in a bunch of different people. So did you kind of GC it and you pulled in the contractors as necessary? And then how did the permits kind of wrap into that part?
Yeah, so we ended up actually hiring out a GC. I was going to do it myself. So one of the things that we had done before we even closed on the project is we had started calling around to the people that we thought that we were going to need. And I've always worked and operated and lived in rural areas. Our other rental properties are always in rural areas. So I knew kind of getting into it that it can be a little bit of a good old boys club sometime, and it can be tough to get your foot in the door. And we found that very quickly here. So I knew before we even closed on the project that we were going to need a GC. And even though that there wasn't a lot of work that they had to do per se, they just have those local connections to the electricians, the plumbers, that at least in the state of Vermont, but I think in a lot of places in today's day and age, you just have a really hard time accessing those good people unless you have the inside door. So we ended up working with the GC. And one of the other lessons that we've taken out of our story, especially if you're going to operate in one of these small rural towns, one of the key partners that you have to have early on is whoever that code enforcement officer is, zoning officer. In the state of Vermont, there's a separate entity called the Division of Fire Safety. What happens in states like Vermont that are so rural is these small towns, they don't always have a local person or they don't have local building codes. So they default to a statewide agency that kind of, that reigns over the decisions of some of that stuff. And the earlier you can get involved with them, the earlier you can get on your side, the better life will be. And we see that play out here all the time, where we see a lot of personalities, a lot of big developer egos come in from out of state, from New York City, from Boston to buy up these small things. And their chest is puffed out when they run into town, and everybody just shakes their head at it locally. And you hear these stories of them spending weeks and months trying to get permits. But what we found is when you bring these people in early on and you get their take before you start on any work. They don't have to come police you and, look over your shoulder all the time. You hear them out, you tell them what you're doing, you're upfront with them. And again, having a project that people want to see fixed up. It's where we've just found situations where, like, when we had to get our plumbing permit, rather than having to wait 2 weeks, we had it 24 hours later. They go back and take care of it. And so that's kind of the bittersweet thing of operating in these small towns. Usually you're working with one person. If you get on their good side, you treat them well, they'll be your best friend and they'll make life go faster. But on the flip side, if you don't handle things right and you burn them, or they got to end up coming and finding out that you tore everything out without bringing them in to figure out what demo's like, they can turn your life upside down pretty quick. So that ended up being, the GC was important. They brought a lot of those key connections in, but I think that's a relationship that's slept on massively, is just that relationship with the local code or zoning officer.
Yeah. Well, I think too, there's obviously the technical aspects of development, right? You were talking about all these different numbers. We're talking about renovations. We're talking about leveraging different relationships to get what you need done. But that third piece that I just referred to, the political piece, is just as important. Getting an understanding of who the decision makers are, getting an understanding of the neighborhood. We've had many people on that have talked about going to their local Metro Council member, or going to the local neighborhood association to start getting feedback from them. Because if you can propose something, or you're going to do something that is of benefit to the area, you're going to have allies when the time comes to be able to propose the final product. So it's not just the technical piece. It is a political, you have to navigate the political waters, and that's just part of being a developer. So I think that you learned that lesson early on, and I'm sure it served you well as a result.
It absolutely did. And that was one. And as you were saying, I want to share one more that was specific to us, but I want to make sure anybody knows that's all fired up about these SBA loans and ready to go take one out. Is one of the things that you'll hear about being a knock at the SBA, and it's kind of a result of the process a lot of people take, is most people, they go to a loan broker. That loan broker sets them up with a big national lender like Live Oak Bank or one of these, and you get your SBA loan through them. But one of the things that they're not always the most forthcoming about early on is they'll sit there and say, hey, we're going to give you $300,000-$400,000 for this renovation. What they don't tell you is you don't get any of that up front. It's all at a draw and a distribution basis after the fact as you get into the project. And one of the things that can be a big challenge that catches a lot of people is if you're working with one of these big, kind of online brokerages or wherever, you rely on them sending an SBA verified inspector every single time to come and check up on you to make sure that project's good to go. And that ends up being, I wouldn't say it's political, but it's a red tape component to these SBA loans that ends up slowing people way down when they end up, you get 3 or 4 rooms done, or you get all your kind of rough in and your electrical and your plumbing done. And now you got to wait a month for somebody to come out to put a stamp of approval on it. So one of the things that I left about our process that we had gotten a tip off on is local economic development centers. So one of the things that we figured out is that you don't just have to go to one of these big brokers. A lot of times in your state, there's a chamber of commerce or a local economic development center that they are administrators of these SBA loans, but on a local level. So what that allowed us to do is, rather than going with all these kind of people in the ivory tower somewhere, we were able to work with somebody local, at that kind of runs the SBA piece, paired up with a local credit union as well. And they had a history of partnering together that not only made it very easy to expedite our closing process. Again, SBA loans get a tough rap of taking 4, 5, 6 months to close. We were able to not only get it done in 90 days, but also when it came time to come to this renovation component, it made getting those draws a lot easier as well. So it was like, hey, either they would come out within a couple of days, or a lot of times I could just send my banker pictures. And because he had just recently been out to the property, we could get those draws same day. That kept our renovation moving along. So to give you a little bit of highlight there, to do all 17 rooms at our property, what I now know should be a pretty burly project, we got done in about a 3-month period, start to finish. And a lot of that was, having those key local contacts, but also having the red tape pieces in place to keep it moving. So again, to kind of put a bow on it, having that right local bank or funding option being another key partner that helped us move things along.
Yeah, no, that's some great advice. And I didn't know about the economic development piece where you could leverage their services to help you as far as getting the stamp of approval for the draws. Because another thing that I know that a lot of people don't think is they say, oh, well, during the construction period, then I'm not necessarily going to have to pay any money, or then I'm not going to have any draw, like actual payments. You get charged interest. It's interest only period, but you get charged interest on all the money that you've drawn out. So as you start to draw more money, those interest payments continue to increase and accrue. And so unless you've balanced out, and obviously the lender is going to do as best they can to make sure that you have enough reserves to account for some of this. But these are the type of things you have to think about as you're going through the project. You don't just have to raise money for the down payment. You got to raise money for closing costs. You got to raise money for holding costs. You got to raise money for all these other things. And so it's definitely important to just share.
Yep.
Yeah.
We sure used it.
We sure used it.
Yeah. You clearly you know what you're talking about now. And I just, what was the biggest surprise that you had to work through to go, okay, now you know what you know now, but what was the biggest surprise that came up? Or maybe in the biggest challenge that you're like, crap. And to that, was there ever a moment where you guys were just like, oh my gosh, what do we get ourselves into?
Yeah, the renovation was the big one, and that's like what I got a couple other notes, but the big one was renovation. And what I'll say is, like, if you're getting in one of these big commercial renovations for the first time, unless you have a partner, unless you have somebody mentoring you that's been through it before, hopefully you at least have like the maturity to listen to those people that I found are often closer than you think. And sometimes you don't want to hear what they have to say, but you need to. Things are just different and they go wrong. And on these big commercial projects, something small, something little, like an extra $1,000 to rewire a hood vent on a bathroom and a few other things, now gets multiplied across 17 rooms in our space. Or it could be different office suites or apartments if you're in multifamily. It all carries over the same. Things just don't always go according to plan and things come up. So it's really making sure that you have, those conservative numbers going into it, the money that you need to get it done. And one of the things that we learned is also the ability of, like, who's going to jump in and take care of this if it goes sideways? If you have a GC that doesn't plan out, if you have somebody that doesn't show up. For us, it was when things started going high on us. So for us, the big things, it was plumbing and electrical work that we didn't expect to have to do. We ended up jumping in to make up the difference. So fortunately, like, I had decided that we were going to come and I was going to be on site for this renovation and be around. And while I didn't plan on having to do that much work, when things started going awry, I was the insurance policy to go out and say, hey, I can't rewire this room. I can't replumb everything. I can't do all the carpentry and some of the woodwork that we did in these rooms, but I can paint every single night so that when the guys come in the next morning, that everything's dry and people literally you're not paying people to sit around and watch paint dry and do caulking and varnishing and things like that were some of like the low skill, high labor tasks that majorly cut down our project and made sure that we could stay on track and make sure that we could stay on with our pro forma that our investors in the bank and everybody had signed up with. So it's really, that was the biggest thing for us, is you don't know that you don't know. And the other thing that is just incredibly important is product market fit, especially in this hospitality space where I think it's really easy to look at a map and have these ideas and say, hey, I'm going to come into a market and create this wellness retreat that has this component or that. But if that market doesn't command it and it's somewhere new that you've never really been there before, it's just a good deal that you see on LoopNet, it doesn't always pan out. So it was one that didn't necessarily take us out, but ended up being such a blessing in hindsight that we had chosen a market to get into, that we kind of had that firsthand experience coming to as a traveler, because we were able to get that product market fit right on the branding, on the design, on the elements that you incorporate to bring in. So examples being, like, we could have gone and done this whole wellness retreat that I think is really popular, but a lot of people coming to Killington, Vermont, it's like 2 firefighters from Boston that are just coming to ski for a weekend. Like, they just want a good, clean, functional room that has other components. So for us, building a custom bike rack that lets them bring their mountain bikes into the room and skis, being one of the only pet-friendly options, like, that ended up being like so much more impactful for us from a dollar standpoint than like a sauna may have. But if you go to another market, say Palm Springs in California, that flips completely, or New York City or one of these more urban markets. So that's the other piece too, is it's just like having that understanding of what you're building for a key avatar. It's just massively important in this space.
Absolutely. And you did all the research up front by you searched Airbnb, you searched all these other sites to see what's available, read reviews, what do people like about certain properties, what do people not like. And over time, you just build your avatar, as you described, about what you are actually targeting. So that's great.
Yeah. And the beautiful thing that I'll say to anybody that's interested in hospitality, we had looked at other asset classes at one point. We had looked at self-storage. We had looked into industrial. I think one of the most beautiful things about hospitality, whether you're going to start cold calling that we found, or you're just trying to do the market research, is these owners are pretty friendly for the most part. Like, and what we were absolutely blown away by when we were doing market research is that it's pretty easy to just walk into a lot of these buildings and just say, hey, I'm looking at doing a project up the road at the old fixed, rundown property that nobody likes. Do you mind telling me a little bit about like what you guys have learned about the market, what your clientele is like, hey, for instance, I don't want to compete with you, but like, what are some of the holes or the gaps or things like that? And we've just found in general in this asset class, Some of it might be being in Vermont. I'll put that on as like it tends to be a pretty friendly state. But all in all, people tend to be incredibly willing to just talk to you about their experience because, again, it hasn't been that asset class a lot of people are reaching out about, especially these small rural, inn owners that they love to share their whole history of what they've done. And that was incredibly helpful for us as well.
Definitely.
Yeah, we've got one that we're looking into in Colorado, and the owner, it's definitely not about price. It's about that this is their baby and they have taken care of it. And they're like, are you guys going to carry this on? And they're vetting us as people, as teammates of what are we going to do with it and in their community. And I like that part of it. I think we need to put the heart and soul back into our, spaces that we have in our community. So yeah, it takes a little bit more effort, but it's totally worth it in the long run.
Yeah. And the reality is, to bring it back to the numbers a little bit, like it's one of the things that I love about hospitality is there's this community driven component. It's creating these spaces that people enjoy. I guess kind of some of the softer touches of renovation in real estate. But now more than ever, that converts over to a financial return as well, because I think we're in a time right now where not only are there a lot of I don't know if there's any other asset that's more operated by this like baby boomer generation that we've heard of. We see all the headlines about people starting to retire and their kids aren't interested. Like it is very much alive and well in this asset class. But at the same time, you have some other market forces happening where there just seems to be a really big discontent with Airbnb right now. People who have had those poor experiences, right or wrong, they don't want to do the checkout tasks anymore. They don't want to pay the big fees. Everything that whether it's true or head trash, it very much so exists with travelers these days. And it's really created this perfect marriage in this asset class where you can really kind of blend the two together, where it's very much like the touches, everything great about designing a well-curated space on Airbnb, but in a functional asset that not only, is there's a lot of operational efficiencies to it, only having one furnace and one roof and one lawn and everything to take care of with everything packed under one roof, but the zoning protections and everything else that's great about being in this commercial real estate, and ultimately the valuation that we talked about at the top of the conversation.
Definitely. Well, it seems like you guys have had a lot of early success. And how long have you guys owned the property now? And have you gone through a full year yet?
It'll be 2 years in February. So we'll cross our 2-year mark. So this will be our second winter, which is really our busy season. And then coming up right now, we're looking to get through a second year of operation and then refinance this asset next year. Hopefully at some point, we'll start looking at that, what that looks into and is at the right time. But ultimately, we plan for it to be an asset that we hang on to for some time.
That's great. So you'll get your investors out and then you'll have this be your property for as long as you want to hold it. So that's exciting, man. That's congratulations on. Yeah, of course. And everything, you can't ever predict the future or anything like that, but you guys have a plan of attack, and if you have to pivot, you're going to pivot, but you're in a good position at this current juncture. But one thing I'm curious about is, what's the future look like? Is this something that you want to replicate throughout the rest of the next few years, or are you planning to take on different projects now in different areas? Like, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, by all means, we are lovers of hospitality and we're lovers of real estate, and it's something that we'll do. One of the lessons that I think if we were doing this podcast 2 years ago, it'd be a very different conversation. I think I'd be telling you how I have plans to go raise every dollar in somebody's IRA right now and go out and buy every rundown motel on the side of the world. But one of the things that this project has taught me is that there's really something beautiful about just doing these well done projects once every 2 years. I'm in my 20s, so I have time on my side. It's one thing, but I love the way this came together, the way that we were able to just find a good asset with good value add in a good market that has a lot of tailwinds going for it right now. We were able to get good debt on it with these SBA loans that allowed us to not have to raise a lot of money, to not have to give a lot of equity away. And by executing the same value add strategy that we would had we had a lot of investors, it's a lot easier to refinance and buy those individuals out. And now I get to own this asset myself into the foreseeable future. So I don't know that it's the most sexy or talked about strategy, but it's something that I really like, is just the idea about once every couple of years, just finding these good assets. So we're coming up to that point now where we'll start looking for another one. Social media has been one of the fun things for us. We have a page called Investors where we documented a lot of our journey and our story running this in. There's been some fun projects that have come through social media as well, really putting a spotlight of other people's properties and breaking some of the stigmas around motels, just kind of some of the fun social media stuff we've really enjoyed. But without a doubt, the plan is to just go find the next property. I'd love to find something more summer focused, cabins up on the ocean in Maine or in the Adirondack Mountains, something that's more summer focused, but will very much so, continue to be in the space going.
I love that. Is there anything about like what you guys have done or with your project that we haven't asked about that we should have, or anything that might be some good advice for new developers? So anything in that realm.
Yeah, I'll take just a second on it if it's okay.
10, 9. Just kidding. Just kidding.
Yeah, I think the big thing for us, and you had mentioned it a little bit how you found us, Kristi, was through social media, but I think that's been one of the biggest things that we didn't talk about that ended up being a huge driving force for us. So for us, social media was very much something that we kind of always did for fun originally. Or if you go way back in our social media, so again, our page, it's investors with 2 N's. You can go back and you can see some of the videos that I made talking about these early deals and funding and some of the ones that didn't work out and some of the ones that did work out. It was always just fun things that I did to kind of give updates on what we were doing. It ultimately ended up being why our first investors chose to come with us. So, we met them at a coffee club meeting, but very much nurtured that relationship through social media where they saw all the effort that we were putting in. And then when we ultimately closed on the project, we ended up documenting a lot of the work that we did. So the whole renovation, everything we did there, and our page absolutely ended up exploding from that. We had a lot of people that came in and they shared it and like the work that we were doing and kind of this journey that we were going through spinning this project around. And that has provide us 10 times of return that we could have asked from any other side. The individuals that now come and stay with us because of that, the contractors, the resources that also wanted to join in and help us, whether it was brand deals from flooring companies that wanted to come in. There were so many benefits that came from social media. If nothing else, the key one just being the guests that have then came and stayed. They loved watching the renovation. We opened, they came and stayed, they booked direct, and we save on the commissions. There's so much benefit that's come from that. I think what's so cool about that too is that, a lot of people said this, well, hospitality sounds so pretty, but there's a lot of examples of other individuals doing these kind of social media journey storytelling type content so well right now in industrial, in office space, in high rise. So it would be the biggest push that I have for somebody else is just document what you're doing. If not anything, just take videos of going through it because you never know what you want to do after the fact. It's something that was really fun for us to do and it made it really enjoyable, but it's had a very on paper impact for us as well, just spreading the word of our project and ultimately for us, the guests, but for you, it could be the tenants that want to come and stay and rent from you as well.
Yeah, to that point, I remember we just like a month or two ago, we had been following a ski resort and we ended up going out of our way to drive through there and have dinner there because we followed their story on Instagram. And we're like, this is super cool. Like, this is awesome. Like, yeah, of course we want to go support them.
Is it Hadley Point in North Carolina? Perfect example. And I know about them and I'm at the total other end of the world, not a massive following, just a small family owned ski resort, but they did such an incredible job doing the same exact thing we are in a totally different asset class, but just goes to show like the value that can have.
Yeah. And we went there and it was an incredible experience. So of course we posted on it on everyone who went there, we posted because we're like, we want to share and help get that out too, because we want, less corporate conglomerations. Like let's support these locals. Let's support the cool stories. So what was it when you guys did social media and like, did one of you go, oh, I know this is where it's at, or just curious how you got that pull? Because I agree, the storytelling and the sharing live is there, but I also know there's a lot of people who are like, oh, I want to be invisible. I don't want to put, which used to be me. But how did you guys get into it or decide?
Yeah, I think we knew. So when we got into social media, for us, it was kind of a little bit of necessity. We were moving 5 hours away from where we lived and where our family were. And we just thought it was kind of twofold for us of why we decided to post on social media, kind of reflecting back to at that moment in time. We thought just personally it'd be really cool as we're in our 20s. We thought like, hey, when we're later on in life and we want to reflect back on this moment, like it'd be really cool to be able to look back at those early days, which I can say in hindsight it is. It's really fun to go back and watch the videos going all the way through. But it also for us, it was a cool way to keep like mom, grandma, everybody updated back home. So there really wasn't, I can't say there was a massive strategy behind social media. The inspiration that I got from it is I'm kind of into sailing and some like weird, obscure stuff like that. And at the time during COVID, there were a lot of other young kids that they're quitting the jobs and cashing out the 401ks and buying these sailboats and going off to like Indonesia. I didn't have the guts to do that, but I loved like the way that they just showed these kind of like day in the life. Like it wasn't really, there wasn't a script, there wasn't an agenda. It was just sharing these updates of them fixing these boats up and documenting it. And I thought, that would be really cool. The other reason why I liked it, to your point, Kristi, if you go back and you look in a lot of our videos, I'm not in a lot of them. It's a lot of my back to the wall as I'm painting a project, just doing a voiceover. I was incredibly nervous to be on camera. And I love the way that from a filming standpoint, whether you see it or not, like you're going through these very cool projects. It doesn't matter if it's a multifamily building, an office building, or a warehouse that you're trying to turn around. It's just a cool thing. And it's a very visually appealing thing to watch people see the phases of one of these projects change. And all we would do is we were going through the day, whether it was us or our contractors, we just filmed everything. And they were just these iPhone basic pan shots. And once or twice a week, I'd stitch them all together and just do a quick voiceover update from it. And that's what went out to Instagram. And like what we found is it's that natural storytelling. There's not an agenda. You're not really creating content. You're just documenting what you're doing. And in that format specifically that we did, I didn't have to be on camera at all either because we were incredibly awkward and uncomfortable with it. So that's really much how we went through it. And it ended up working out because both for us and hundreds of other individuals out there doing the same thing. You just see it happen time and time again where they're able to really grow these large followings that then in return have these impacts for their businesses, but you just got to get started and do it. But what we found is once you get the ball rolling, it's pretty fun with this style of content. We really enjoyed it.
I found it really enjoying a couple of the things I'm doing now because I'm like, I literally will have this so documented between AI videos and like social media that I'm very excited for 10, 20 years from now to look back and go, wow, what could we put together from that?
Yeah, I love that.
Super cool.
Well, Brett, we really appreciate your time. I know you've been sharing some great insights, and I'm really looking forward to keeping in touch. And I'll definitely go and try to see if I can follow you guys on Instagram. So I'm excited to follow along. But if you want to learn more about what you're doing, especially future projects, or wanting to get in touch with you guys to ask questions, or maybe even the future, get involved in some of the projects you guys are doing, what's the best way to be able to do that?
Instagram's the best way to get in touch with us. We're on Facebook and TikTok and a couple of those, but like our Instagram page, again, it's investors in with 2 N's. Between me and my wife, we're on there daily. We answer a lot of questions. If you got questions about real estate, just what we're doing, we have couples that come and stay here at the motel and we give them all the ins and outs on what we're doing and, looking to replicate the same thing we've done. We're very accessible, but social media, just shoot us a message. It's the easiest way to get a hold of us.
All right, that's awesome. Yeah, you guys should do a conference, right?
Yeah, no, I like that.
You have a conference at your. That's my dad jokes coming out of me.
I was gonna say, come on, you just had the newborn.
Hey,
oh, that's perfect.
I'm practicing. Well, Brett, we really do appreciate your time, and I'm really looking forward to keeping in touch. And I'm excited to hear the feedback that the audience has from this particular episode because I'm sure they will gain some great insights. Along with that, if you guys are watching this on YouTube, please like and subscribe. It makes a huge impact on our ability to reach a broader audience, and we obviously greatly appreciate the support. Along with that, if you guys are listening to us in a podcast format, whether that's Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please leave a 5-star review. The more people who leave 5-star reviews, the more people that ultimately can find the podcast. And the more people that find the podcast, the more people will hopefully get inspired to take on their first real estate development project. So thanks again so much for tuning in, and we'll see you all next time.